Hello, Mario. How are you? It's good morning in Philadelphia, isn't it?
It is good morning, and it is a good morning, too. It's a little cool and a little rainy here, but it's springtime and the trees are blossoming, so it's a very nice morning.
Yeah.
It's nice to see you, Tamer.
Nice to see you, too. So on my side, I'm recording while we are still in Ramadan. This episode will be aired after Ramadan, but it's really also cool weather here in Cairo during May. So actually during April, we did not get to May yet.
Right.
So let me, Mario, if you allow me, let me start by introducing you to the audience. And then we start our conversation today. And our topic is very much related to the theme of the Elder Brother series of video this month, which is awareness. So we are going to have conversation about awareness, and the reason that I'm doing this, that you are an expert in this area and actually have a book and a company that is called Awareness to Action. I mean, the Awareness to Action is like a theme that is repeated, a book, a company, a process of change, and we'll discuss some of that.
It's my brand.
Yeah, exactly. So let me read your bio and then start our conversation after that. So Mario Sikora is an internationally known expert in performance improvement, clear thinking and decision-making, and the theory and application of the enneagram model of personality styles. Since 1997, he has used this expertise to advise business leaders and their teams in numerous multinational companies. Also, he created an approach to the Enneagram that is used by coaches, consultants, HR, and OD leaders and leaders to help others reach peak performance. He also applies the insights of the Enneagram model to sports, entertainment, and self-development. Mario is CEO of Awareness to Action International, which provides executive coaching and Enneagram-based leadership programs to organizations of all sizes, as well as certification programs for coaches, consultants, and HR and OD professionals. Awareness to Action International has partners and associates based in the United States, Latin America, Europe, and the Middle East. He's also author or co-author of 5 books. Mario is based near Philadelphia, where he lives with his wife and 4 sons. So what do you like to add to this bio that would help our audience today to really make sense of the topic of awareness? What do you like to add to this bio?
Well, you did a good job of covering the bio. I think for me, the only thing I would add, and I don't know that this is biographical necessarily, but this has always been a passion of mine ever since I was young, trying to understand the world, trying to see the world clearly, trying to understand what obstacles get in my own way from seeing the world clearly, and how to help people pass the obstacles that hinder them as well. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to spend to make my living and my career out of doing something that I'm very passionate about.
I would like also to add, because I remember, and it's not really written in your bio, that you are one of the Enneagram community leaders, not only by supporting this community to grow in an informal way, but also you have been the president of the International Enneagram Association for 2 years, I guess 2013 and 2000.
I think it was actually 2011, 2012.
Okay, 2011 and 2012.
Right.
And since then, you are still supporting the community, although you don't have an official role in the association, but you're one of the main supporters to the International Enneagram Association.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show you, if you hang around long enough, you move into kind of an elder statesman sort of role and, refuse to go away. So I've been, I think, for me, the Enneagram has been such an amazingly powerful tool in my life and in the work that I do, that it's important to me to see the work be done well. And so being able to share my experience with people who are newer to the Enneagram or less experienced in using it is something that I think is really important. So, and I think that goes with the theme of what you're doing too, Tamer, as the, as the elder brother, is to be generative, right? To step back and say, okay, I've had people who have helped me along in my path. I have people who have taken me under their wing and recommended, things to study and given me advice and so forth. And I think it's important to pay those back. So I try to do that, particularly in the Enneagram world when I can.
Yeah, so let me get into the topic of today, which is awareness. How would you define the term awareness, especially when it comes to the work that you do, whether with leaders or in teaching coaches and other professionals? How do you define the term awareness?
So awareness is one of those words that has multiple meanings, and it's a broad word and captures multiple things. And often that's fine because we're talking about a broad area of capabilities. And other times we have to be a bit more specific, right? So what sort of awareness do we mean here? So for me, awareness comes in multiple forms. One is simply the capacity of paying attention, right? Or the state of paying attention, meaning that I am intentionally directing my attention in a particular place rather than letting it wander, right? Because our attention does wander. This is one of the components of human nature, is that it's really difficult to direct our attention to a particular area for any length of time. And there are all sorts of practices that help us do that, right? Simple meditation exercises, for example, concentrating on a candle, counting our breaths, repeating a mantra and so forth, help us train our ability to pay attention. There's also elements of awareness that are analytical in nature, meaning I am aware of what I'm experiencing now. Okay, so once I direct my attention, what am I directing that attention to? And sometimes I'm directing it internally, and this is what we call self-awareness, meaning what am I experiencing physically? What am I experiencing emotionally? Okay, what am I feeling right now? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling sad? Am I feeling stress? Am I feeling pain? There's another element of awareness that is external awareness. Okay. Now there's external self-awareness, which is, understanding what other people think of us, which is another form of awareness. So it's reading people, it's reading social cues, right? You're looking at me through the camera now, and, there's part of my mind that is wondering, okay, what does Tamer think? Is he getting bored with the length of my response? Is he confused because I'm not making any sense, or what's happening here? There's also sort of reputational awareness, meaning what do people think of us and our work and how we go about things. And finally, I would say there's awareness that is kind of a form of knowledge, right? So it's applied awareness. And this is being aware of the world and how it works, the facts of the world, and how they can be properly understood. So those are the broad categories I would put awareness into: attention, internal self-awareness, external self-awareness, awareness of others, awareness of the world.
So why is awareness important for leaders? What is the application of awareness in leadership?
Yeah. So the job of a leader is to, it's to lead people, right? So it's to take people and be followed by those people in a particular direction. And whenever a leader assumes the responsibility of leadership, they have a responsibility for leading ethically, morally, effectively, okay, taking people the right places, okay? And so awareness, and not just taking them the right places, but being able to do so effectively, okay, being a skillful leader, inspiring people to follow. So all of these elements that we talked about that define leadership, that define awareness, are important for leaders, right? A leader has to have self-awareness. Well, start from the beginning. They have to be able to pay attention, Okay, so they have to be able to direct their mind in a skillful way. Okay, think about the things that I need to think about, direct my awareness in particular place. They have to understand themselves and their the vulnerabilities that their patterns of behaving and thinking and feeling create for them. They have to be aware of other people, what motivates people, what inhibits people, what brings out the best in people. And they have to be aware of the environment, okay, what's happening in the world around us, and how do we respond to it. And as the world changes in us, then we have to be aware of, what does that bring up in me? Okay, so, we live in a time of dramatic change, and, being aware of the impact of those changes on us, on the people around us, etc., are an element of awareness that are extremely important to leaders. We called the company and the book originally Awareness to Action, because it's all about action. That's the job of a leader, right? Is to get people to act. And a good, skillful action is built on a foundation of awareness. So any leader who expects to be skillful in any way needs to develop their self-awareness and awareness of others.
So Mario, actually, I always get this question from my followers. Not always, actually, in the beginning, that I'm not really an official leader. I don't lead the team. And I used to answer that we are all leaders because we lead our life. We lead, maybe if I'm a father, I'm leading in my household. If I'm in a group of friends, I have to lead to my group of friends. I mean, we are all leaders into the group of friends and so on. And in order to achieve things in my life, I have to be leader for my own life. So my question to you, for self-leaders, this type of leaders, why is awareness is important? I'm not impacting others. Why is it important?
So it's awareness that helps us make skillful decisions, okay? And anybody, whether they're a leader or not, whether they see themselves as a leader or not, needs the capacity for self-awareness, right? I mean, because we all have to interact with the world. We all have relationships with other people. If we're not a leader, we, are probably an employee of some sort. Okay, so these elements of awareness make us better employees, right? I help to understand my strengths and weaknesses. It helps me understand what my boss wants. It helps me to be more skillful in doing the job that I have. So, having these skills is important for our own job survival. The other thing is, again, we all have relationships, right? Whether it's relationships with, a spouse, relationships with children, family, friends, whatever it is. And our relationships are more effectively when we have self-awareness and awareness of others, right? If I have behaviors or attitudes that alienate people or that frustrate people, my relationships are going to suffer. And very often we fall into the assumption that it's the other person who's the source of the problems in any relationship, right? We rarely look at ourselves and say, oh, wait a minute, I'm acting in a way that is not kind, that's not skillful, that's not assertive, whatever it is I need in that situation. So it's the practice of awareness that helps us be skillful in any interaction with the world, right? I mean, I can't think of any kind of activity that is not benefited in some way by developing better awareness.
Okay, so you said paying attention, and I like this term very much because it makes sense and it's easy to understand. It's not like these complex spiritual terms that sometimes I don't understand what you mean by it, and I cannot relate to my experience. So if we want to make it a little bit easier and focused for leaders, what are the top things that the leader need to pay attention to and how he or she can achieve that?
Well, the first thing, so there needs to be some discipline around being able to direct our attention intentionally, okay, rather than randomly. Okay, so we all have those experiences where we're just sitting there, maybe we're driving the car, maybe we're just sitting there at the dinner table, and our mind wanders. Okay, we go through this stream of consciousness thinking where we start over here and we end up thinking about something completely different. And if we
kind of daydreaming,
right? And if we track the thoughts, then yeah, okay, I understand how I got here, but this was all just random thoughts that passed through my head. And that's fine, right? There's nothing wrong with that, okay? Except when our attention is required to something, right? So if we're a leader and we're facing a business challenge, right? Market dynamics changing, employee problems, whatever it is, we have to have the capacity to stay focused on a topic for an appropriate length of time. And we all know those people who you try to have a conversation with them and they just jump all over the place, right? Or you're trying to talk to them and you can see their mind wandering off, right? And nobody likes to be in a position where they're talking to their boss and they can tell that their boss's mind is wandering, or they start to look at their cell phone, or they start to check their email or something like that. So the ability to direct our attention, okay, if a subordinate or a peer or even your boss is talking to you, just being able to actually pay attention to them while they're talking is a huge skill that we are losing as a society, given the amount of distraction that we face. Okay, so some sort of practice that trains people to direct their attention. And again, there are, lots of mindfulness practices around that. Counting your breaths is one good example, right? Sitting, counting your breaths up to 9, and then starting over again, etc. Okay, so that's one thing that's really, really important for leaders. The second thing, again, I think is some understanding of human nature, our own nature and how it affects us, other people's nature and how it affects us. And that's why we use the Enneagram so much, because it's to me the best model there is of understanding human nature, and it allows me to see things as they are. And this is a big part of awareness, is seeing things as they are rather than as we want them to be or envision them to be, or are deluded into thinking they are, right? So the Enneagram helps us see our own patterns and understand the patterns of other people. And then finally, it's an awareness of how the mind works in order to create obstacles to seeing the world clearly. And there's a lot of great science on this and a lot of great books on this. And it's, something that we talk about in our work a lot, that the mind will trick you. Okay. And the problem with this is, sometimes we see it, right? We all like to look at optical illusions. Okay. You get those books of optical illusions and everybody says, oh, wow, isn't it crazy how the mind tricks you and so forth? But we don't extrapolate that to the rest of the world, right? We don't extrapolate that to the rest of our experience. And we say, well, wait a minute, I wonder what else I think I'm seeing that I'm not, or what am I not seeing that is really there? And so understanding the nature of how the mind works, I think is a foundational skill for effective leadership.
Yeah, that's amazing. What you said paying attention to others, paying attention to yourself, and paying attention to your mind, how it works. And from the 3, actually, I conclude of paying attention of your impact, whether on situations or others, because that is like the combination of the 3 things. When you pay attention to others, you would be able to understand, make sense of them and your impact on them. When you pay attention to yourself, you would be able to make sense of what you mean or what you intend and what you actually do, and if there's difference between both. And when you pay attention to your mind, you would make sense of what is reality and what and how is your mind synthesizing this reality.
That's
lots of work, Mario.
Well, it is lots of work, right? I mean, being a leader, being a skillful adult is not for babies, right? I mean, these things require anything in life that's worth having requires work. And there are so many people who think, well, just the way I think, just the way I am is sufficient, right? I mean, that's okay. Well, that's fine if you want to be mediocre, right? But how many athletes do we see? Well, you know what? I'm perfectly fine just the way I am, right? And well, no, every athlete who's ever going to be anything wants to be more and more skillful, right? So they practice and they work, and and every artist, right? I mean, how many great musicians do we see who don't practice? Okay.
Mhm.
The best musicians practice relentlessly, right? They practice and practice and practice and practice. And so, if we want to be skillful thinkers and see the world clearly, I'm sorry, but you have to work at it, right? I mean, it's just, it's not something that comes naturally to people. The problem is that everybody thinks it comes naturally to them, right?
Mhm.
Everybody thinks that they're a skillful leader. I remember having a conversation with one time and was talking about the problems with memory. Okay, and there's a lot of great research on memory and how our memories are really, really bad. Okay, they're really not as good and accurate as we think they are. The way that the mind works is that when it's storing a memory, it's storing a snapshot, right? Like a picture. And then when it goes to recall the memory, it pulls up the picture, but then creates a video around the picture, right? Now, we think that that video is the actual memory, but it's not. It's the creation from the present moment based on that snapshot that the brain took. Over time, those videos change because we're recreating them over and over again. So very often our memories are not what we think they are. Okay.
Mhm.
And I remember explaining this to someone and saying, well, it's why sometimes, we have conversations with people and we say, well, you said this. And they say, well, no, you said that. And then you said this. And they go back and forth arguing over what happened. When the reality is we can't really trust who was right. And this person says to me, oh, yeah, that's so true, man. People do that all the time. I don't do that because my memory is really good, but other people do this all the time. So we fall into this trap of thinking that I think clearly, but you're the problem. And we have to understand I have all the same challenges that you do when it comes to clear thinking. And so I need to work at it.
Yeah, it's like the main understanding that this faults of thinking is part of human nature is very important for a leader, because otherwise he's like how would I say it? It's like lacking awareness. I mean, it's there and it's getting you into troubles, but you're not aware of that, which is even a problem, because if you're not aware, you will never work on it.
Yes. Yes. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. So it's this awareness that spurs us to improve. And I'll also say that the people who pay most attention to these things are the people who face the gravest consequences, right? So, for example, hospitals, okay? In the medical industry, particularly in the US, there's this movement toward, or there has been for a while, towards evidence-based medicine, meaning that, okay, here's what the evidence says. The best evidence recommends this medication, whereas for these other medications, the evidence isn't as good. Okay. Well, over time, it makes most sense to go where the best evidence is. So doctors will prescribe the medication or the procedure that has the best supporting evidence. Now, that evidence might change, right? With more cases, with more variations and so forth, then the course of action might differ in the future, but it's crazy not to use the best evidence, right? So understanding how evidence is gathered, understanding what good evidence is versus bad evidence, and being aware enough of our own biases again, just makes us more skillful in all aspects of life.
Okay, so I would like to refer to your process of creating change, which is the awareness to action. Again, we're back to awareness. And the first step of this process is awareness. It's very interesting that part of this step, although it's awareness, but part of it is setting goal for change. So, I mean, intuitively, one would think that setting goal should be a different step than awareness. So explain to me why setting goal is part of awareness.
Yeah. So the three pieces with, under the awareness piece of the awareness to action process is, number one, paying attention, right? So, okay, what is happening right now? What's working? What's not working? Okay. And we particularly apply this when something is not working, right? When we're happy, when we feel content, when the people around us are happy, when we're getting what we want out of life, then we don't have to worry about changing, right? We can think about growing and improving, but we don't have to think about changing something until there's some friction in life, right? So, okay, my wife's mad at me, my kids are upset, I didn't get a contract that I wanted, whatever it is. This is a signal to pay attention. Okay, so we have to practice that self-awareness that helps us understand, okay, I'm feeling something bad right now. Pay attention to what's happening. Okay, then it helps us to understand what our patterns are. Okay, well, I've done this before, or this has happened before. What does this say about my habitual patterns? Okay, my personality. And again, this is why the Enneagram can be so useful. It says, you know what, you're an 8, you're probably doing an 8 thing again, right? And so pay attention to that. Now, setting a goal for change. Why is this in the awareness piece? Because we have to be aware of what we want, okay, of what we truly want, of what matters to us. Okay, so it's through this process of paying attention, recognizing the problem, understanding our patterns that we say, okay, now I need to be intentional about where I'm trying to get to. It's like checking a map. Okay, if we're driving along, you're old enough to remember real maps too, but it used to be, you'd have to unfold this paper map, and while you're trying to decide where you want to get to, you have to practice awareness, right? You're looking at the map and you're saying, okay, well, I want to get here, but I'm here, so how do I get there? And you can't just say, okay, I've got the map open, here's where I am, let me move on. Well, no, you have to be aware of where it is you want to get to make sure that it's really a place you want to go. Okay, because it might not be the right place. You might say, well, I thought I wanted to go there, but now that I think of it, I probably want to go somewhere else. So anything about change, we have to be conscious and deliberate about what change we're trying to make before we start doing the action to make those changes.
Yeah, I like very much the way you're explaining it. Is being aware of what we want.
Yes.
Is being aware of the reference of awareness. So because I cannot be aware of everything, I cannot pay attention to everything. But if I put a reference, this is my goal for change. So now I know the area that I need to pay attention to. It's like reference or a kind of direction of paying attention, directing attention.
Yeah, that's a really important point that we should talk about. Is you can't be aware and paying attention all the time, right? There are people who say, oh, you should be present and aware, at every moment and so forth. And that's just not humanly possible. Okay. It requires too much energy from the brain. It's too exhausting. The reality is that the capacity to function on autopilot, okay, is kind of one of nature's gifts to us. It helps us to save energy to devote to other things. Okay. So we have to be skillful at switching back and forth between attention and autopilot. And if we think of being in an airplane, right, most airplanes function on autopilot most of the time, right? Somebody was telling me recently they were talking to a pilot, and the pilot said the scariest thing is when you wake up in the cockpit and realize your co-pilot was sleeping too, right? So, and that did not fill me with great enthusiasm about flying, but it was, a reminder that most of the time that the pilots are, they're relying on the autopilot.
Yes.
But they have to know when to pay attention, right? They have to know when to kind of snap awake. And so this is the real skill, is being able to sort of toggle back and forth between functioning on autopilot and being intentional and attentional at the same time.
So can you give like a couple of examples to that? Probably an organizational leadership example and self-leadership example?
So with an organizational leadership example, I mean, you have to, we can't, in addition to not being able to be aware all the time, it's just not fruitful, right? Because say that there's an initiative in the organization. Okay, we're going to adopt a new CRM, say, or we're going to go after a new target market. You have to decide, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's our goal for change. Okay, here's our action steps. Now let's try the action for a while. Let's automate this process, either psychologically or, literally automate it in some way, and get some experience under our belt, and then check in and be aware and do an assessment, right? So we're going to go after this new target audience. And so I make a cold call to one potential client in that new audience, and they say, no, thank you. Well, I don't immediately say, okay, well, this isn't going to work, so I'm going to go back to the old way, right? So we have to give it a bit of time, of effort, before we check in and reevaluate. Say, okay, well, we've been doing this for a month now. How's it working? Or we've been doing it for a week, depending on the situation. So it's, this checking in, this awareness piece of it is something that you have to set aside sometimes, right? Or else you're changing course every 2 minutes. Okay, because you're thinking about it too much, and you're overanalyzing and so forth. Okay. Same thing with an exercise program or a weight loss program in our personal lives, right? I've been on and off the keto diet, right? So if I did keto for 3 hours, and then said, well, I don't see the weight coming off. I've been observing myself. I've been paying attention to my body, and it's not working yet. I better change. Well, you're never going to get anywhere that way. You have to say, okay, I'm going to go into this process of following this diet for a week, say, and 2 weeks or a month or whatever we decide. And I'm not really going to think about it. I'm just going to execute it. And then I'm going to pay attention. Now, this doesn't mean we don't pay attention along the way. If my body feels weird or I feel some health challenge, take a look at it. So there's this element of, we have to practice awareness, set a course of action, and then just let the course of action run for a while before we check in with awareness again.
There's another element in the awareness to action process, which is the story. And I see, although this is not how you explain it in the official literature of the process, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I see that paying attention to our story is also another area, another important thing. Yes. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so humans are storytelling creatures, as I think it was Aristotle said. There's a great line from a writer named Joan Didion who said, we tell ourselves stories in order to live, right? Because we can't function without stories, right? Stories about what foods we like, stories about what politics we follow, what religion we follow, what our cultural issues are, stories about the brands that we like and so forth, stories about the people in our world. The brain is creating stories all the time. And this is a way of creating shortcuts, right? If I have stories about people in my mind, then I don't have to treat them as if I'm meeting them for the first time each time, right? So it helps us to streamline life. It's a really good quality to have, except when our stories become outdated, okay? We can use technology as an example of that, right? We can think about marketing, for example, and what applied in marketing 3 years ago may not apply today. There are some things that are fundamentally the same, but there are other things that are dramatically different. Why? Because the environment has changed, right? The world has changed around us. And if we're stuck in an old story, then we are behind the times and we are going to suffer. If we're stuck in some inaccurate story, right? When we think about our personality styles, for example, as a type 8, I have stories about what it means to feel powerful. And sometimes those stories are maladaptive, meaning they cause me more trouble than they actually solve. Okay. So being willing to analyze our stories and do it frequently. First of all, we have to recognize our stories, right? We have to ask ourselves whenever something's not working, okay, well, what is my story about this? Okay. And how is that story outdated? What is the evidence in the world around us that would challenge this story? And how can I rewrite it in a way that allows me to behave in a new way? Marketing, for example, again, 10, 12 years ago, I guess it was all about MySpace, right? Or, maybe it's a little older than that, but if people are marketing for MySpace these days, well, they're going to run into some trouble. Okay. It's just in the news this week that Elon Musk is buying TikTok. Okay. Well, TikTok,
Twitter.
I'm sorry, Twitter. Yeah. Thank you. Twitter could be a completely different thing in 3 months than it is today. Right. But if we're treating Twitter the same way that, then that we are now, we could run into trouble. So recognizing our stories and being able to change them and adapt them about the world and about ourselves is the only way we can really grow.
Isn't it difficult to identify our stories? I mean, it's to me, it's like the fish that is swimming in the water. You wouldn't be able to see the water because you're swimming in it all the time.
Yeah, it is difficult to see our own stories, and it takes practice and it takes effort. And one of the ways we can challenge our own stories is to get into the habit of asking ourselves the simple question of, how do I know this to be true? And how can I disprove this story? Right? Science is based on falsification, meaning I come up with a hypothesis and then I try to prove it false. Okay. I don't try to prove it true, because you can prove anything to be true, right? If you just cherry pick the evidence. So it's, how do I prove this to be false, or can I prove it to be false? So we have to learn to work to falsify our own stories, but it also helps to get help, right? Because as you say, our stories are the water we swim in. We often simply don't see them. But it's easier to see other people's stories, right? It's really easy when you're talking to someone to say, geez, why can't they see this, right? Don't they see what they're doing? And and everybody thinks that about other people, but nobody thinks it about themselves. So having somebody who is skillful at helping us see our stories to coach us and challenge us or mentor us is really, really useful. So I always encourage people, if you can't afford a coach and you don't have a mentor, find some smart friends to give you feedback.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, you already mentioned a couple of tools that I discussed in the videos, which is basically checking with yourself. How would I know that this is true? What evidence would prove that I'm wrong about what I believe? But honestly speaking, again, we would get pushback but I forget to do this. I mean, while I'm thinking, while I'm taking actions, while I'm making decisions, I never remember to do that. I remember it when I'm just relaxed and meditating. But when I'm in the middle of the action, it's not really easy to remember to go through this process.
Yeah, it's easy.
So what advice would you give to this person?
Yeah. So it's easy to be enlightened on the mountaintop, right?
Yes.
If you're sitting in a monastery and all your meals are being provided for you and you don't have the stresses of life and family and work and all these sort of things, it's a bit easier to do some of these things, right? So there's two pieces of it, right? So there are skillful tactics and techniques we can develop, okay? And I'll talk about those in a moment. But the thing we also have to acknowledge that part of any change and growth is will, right? Having the will to do it, the discipline, self-discipline to work at these things, right? So everybody wants a pill, right? Everybody wants to take, I take this pill and I'll be enlightened. I take this pill and I'll be, my perfect body weight. And I take this pill and I'll get all my hair back, all these sort of things, right? That's not the way life works. So there is an element of work to it. Now, to make it easier, I always tell my clients that whenever they're trying to make a change like this, they should prepare to fail and to fail often. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But to work on shortening the amount of time between when they fail and when they recognized that they failed. Okay. So for example, I talked about the exercise of counting your breaths. Okay. And if you've ever done this exercise, you know that, okay, so I'm going to count my breaths up until 9 or maybe 10, and then I'm going to start over again. So I'm going to go 9, 1, 2, etc. Okay. And, so it's easy for the first couple of minutes or so, but then you're there and you find yourself counting and you realize you're saying 24, 25, right? And you say, oh, geez, I forgot. Okay. Let me go back to 1. So the goal is not to never get past the number, but it's to reduce the number of times that you do that, or catch yourself at, say, 12 or 13 instead of 37. Okay. And so catching ourselves in the act and focusing on shortening the amount of time it takes to catch ourselves in the act is what our efforts should be on. Okay. Not to never fail, but to reduce the amount of time between when we fail and when we fix something. Okay. Now, there are other more practical things we can do, right? Other more tactical things. I encourage people to do a daily audit for something that they're working on, right? At the end of the day, if I am working on challenging my assumptions, say, about myself, right? At the end of the day, take a few minutes to reflect back and say, how did I do on this? Would I give myself a green light, a yellow light, or a red light, right? 1, 2, or 3 on a scale. And then ask yourself, okay, what could I do better tomorrow in order to do this? Okay. So, so there are little tactical things we can do. There are attitudinal things we can do, meaning how we go about it in the long run. And we have to just recognize that it's hard work.
I would like to link this to something that you said a few minutes ago, which is practicing, and you mentioned athletes who are practicing continuously. And I guess this is the best advice ever, is think of yourself if you would like to improve your life or to master it, whether you're a leader of an organization or you are an individual who's trying to lead his life. You should think like an athlete. The athlete would really practice in a very disciplined way. So when the athlete is in the game, he would do the best possible according to the current acquired skills and keeps improving all the time.
Absolutely. And so I always tell my clients to work the delta, right? Meaning recognize what is the delta between where you are now and where you want to be in whatever the skill is. Okay. And then we focus on, okay, how do we close that delta? An analogy in sports that comes to mind is there's a basketball player named Steph Curry, who's probably the greatest shooter ever, right? And, so this guy is just relentlessly practices 3-point shots, right? So shots that are farther away. And over time, he has gone from not just practicing the shots over and over again, but reducing the size of the basket so that his shots are more likely to go directly into the middle of the basket, right? To refine that amount of time. So he has this special device that kind of overlays the basket and makes the hole smaller, right? So even though he's already the best shooter in history of the game, he is still finding ways to improve. He's still finding ways to refine what he's doing. And so that's a great example. And I think that any leader can say, okay, I'm feeling pretty good, but what can I do to do this just a little bit better, right? Who do I want to be? Do I want to be good or do I want to be great? Do I want to be great or do I want to be the best, right? And then how do I get from where I am now to whatever that goal is?
So I guess the athlete model is a very good model to imitate in life. I also remember an interview for Michael Jordan where he said that he has a daily goal to improve 1%. I think it's a huge goal, but he is Michael Jordan. He's not another person.
That's why he's Michael Jordan, right?
Yes.
Because of that relentlessness. And it's, and when you think about it, on the one hand, so you're right, 1%, depending on what we're talking about, is a lot, okay, for each day. But if you think about, what 1% is on Michael Jordan, his basketball game, versus, say, my basketball game, okay? Think of the return that you're getting when Michael Jordan improves 1% versus what you get when I improve 1%, okay? I'm still going to be a lousy basketball player, right? But he's going to be a superstar who's even better, okay? So, but he's been accruing this interest for years and years and years. Okay, that's the whole idea of compound interest. The more you work early on, the more impact you're going to have down the road. So incremental performance, recognizing that the world is getting tougher, right? Again, if we stick with basketball, right? I was a big Michael Jordan fan back in the day. I still think he was probably the greatest basketball player ever. Yes. But if you compare the skills and the physicality of basketball players in the 90s to today, it's just, it's a whole different animal, right? I mean, we've got, basketball players who are 6'10" playing point guard. I mean, that's just insane, right? I mean, that's super tall. And you have these guys who, back in the 90s, if somebody was 6'10" or 7 foot tall, they'd have probably been fairly clumsy and, not hugely athletic. But now you've got a very different competitive environment. And that happens in the business world too, right? I mean, everybody's out there trying to get better. So if you're not working to improve in whatever way you can, you're going to end up being left behind.
So if I take awareness as a skill or a muscle to develop, and actually take the analogy of athlete, I'm trying now here to summarize what we said about that, because I think that would be a very good tip to our audience here. So first of all is to practice. Take it seriously and practice improving your awareness. Second thing is set a goal for this. I mean, for the improvement, as we said, like Michael Jordan is putting 1%, you put some kind of a goal for improving your awareness. Third thing, and which you have mentioned, you can use an external help. It's like Michael Jordan is using the coach, or all athletes, they are using a coach. You can use a coach. If not a coach, you can be coached by your managers. You can use a friend who is really sincere, who would give you, who would show you something that you are a blind spot for you.
Or you can read good books, right?
You can read good books. That's very important. You have mentioned the enneagram, the cognitive biases. Understanding about these things will make you more aware of them inside you.
I think too, it helps to make the distinction between competencies, skills, and attributes, right? When it comes to awareness, because when we think of awareness, we can think of it as an attribute, right? An attribute is something that is a broad state. If we stick with sports, we could say that strength or speed are attributes, okay? But you can't just will yourself to be faster or to be stronger, okay? You have to develop skills, which are a subset of attributes. So if we think of speed as an attribute, we can think of sprinting as a skill, okay? I'm sorry, as we can think of it as a competency. Sorry, let me just be clear about this. So it's, I'm going to back up here a second. Okay, so we think of attributes, competencies, and skills. All right. So speed comes in many forms, right? It could be hand speed, it could be foot speed, it could be the ability to change direction. Okay, but you can't just will yourself to do that. So we have to break it down into competencies. Okay, running is a competency. Okay, and then we talk about a skill. And that can be sprinting, which is different from long distance running. We can think of hurdling, which is running and jumping over things, as specific skills. We can think of a skill as, if you're a track runner, getting out of the block more quickly, right, as one thing. Using your arms right is another skill. So when it comes to anything we want to do as a leader, including awareness, we want to think of it in terms of attribute, competencies, and skills. And when we go from an attribute of awareness, we want to look at different competencies, self-awareness, right? It can be either internal or external, awareness of others, awareness of the world. And then there are specific skills, okay, which are learning how to think, how to observe ourselves, how to learn, how to challenge misinformation, et cetera, all specific skills. So that's another thing I would encourage people to do to approach this in a more digestible way. Is once you kind of take those actions you're talking about, look at specific skills you want to develop related to awareness that will over time increase the general capacity to be aware.
That's amazing, Mario. Let me go back to the clear thinking part. And you have written a book about clear thinking. You also have written a book about the Enneagram, actually a couple of books about the Enneagram. One of them is Awareness to Action. The second one is Instinctual Leadership. The third one is the Enneagram Guidebook. So now I'm talking about the clear thinking. So if you would give a tip to a leader, what kind of cognitive biases, if one or two or three cognitive biases, a leader should be aware of, and how to overcome the challenges of such cognitive biases?
So cognitive biases are the brain's way of reducing what's called cognitive dissonance. Okay, cognitive dissonance is the stress we feel when we are facing conflicting ideas, okay, or conflicting beliefs. I believe that this is the direction that the company needs to go. And whenever evidence comes in that challenges that belief, I start to feel stress. Okay, a project fails, an initiative doesn't work, etc. What the brain does in order to make that stress go away is to fall into cognitive biases. Okay, and this is biased ways of thinking, uneven ways of thinking, habitual ways of thinking that make the stress go away. So confirmation bias is kind of the mother of all cognitive biases, right? And it's basically that the brain's tendency to see things that it wants to see and not see things that it doesn't want to see. Okay, so if I am pushing an initiative in my organization, it is natural for me to overweight the evidence that supports my desire, I want this initiative to work, and to underweight the evidence that goes against it. This project is failing. Okay, so we have to be aware of that cognitive, of that confirmation bias. Okay, and we have to ask ourselves, okay, what evidence am I missing or discounting? And we have to go in search of that. okay? And we have to, remind ourselves that we're probably going to see what we want to see, okay? So understanding confirmation bias and how it comes in two forms, right? We see what we want, we ignore what we want to ignore. That's number one. The second one I always encourage people to watch out for is what's called the fundamental attribution error. And this is basically jumping to conclusions about people or circumstances based on one or a few pieces of evidence. Okay. When we see somebody in a particular situation and say they lose their temper, it's easy for us to just assume that that's part of their nature, that they're an angry person, instead of asking ourselves, okay, well, why was that person angry? And is this the way they always are? Was this circumstantial? Okay. We have the tendency to jump to conclusions about other people and see their behavior as a mark of their character, meaning who they are, rather than being circumstantial.
And that works both ways, in positive behaviors or negative behaviors.
Absolutely, right? So, and when we do it positively, yes, we do it positively, and it can also take the form of what we call the halo effect, right? They're good at one thing, we assume they're good at something else. Okay, we tend to assume that that attractive people, for example, are more ethical and smarter, when there may be no evidence for that, and it may not be the situation at all. It's just that our brain does that. We like this one thing about them, we assume that they have other good things. We assume that because somebody's an expert in one thing, that they have expertise in other things as well, right? So we end up taking really bad advice in certain areas from people who can give us really good advice in others, right? So recognizing we don't want to fall into that halo effect, and that fundamental attribution error is really important. Okay. I think another thing, and it's not so much a cognitive bias, but something that's really, really important, is to recognize that humans are tribal creatures, okay? That we tend to favor the people that we're close to, the people that are our tribe, and we tend to feel threatened by, or at least distrust, people who we don't see as part of our tribe. And that can be cultural, right? I mean, it's why there's so many cultural clashes in the world. It can be organizational, right? This is why whenever people are in a company that does an acquisition or gets acquired, there's always this stress between people from, the one organization and people from the other, because we fall into our tribes and we start to, see this. So recognizing that we fall into tribes, and that it's not just a matter of saying, oh, you know what, we're part of the bigger organization now. Because one of the things about tribalism is that it makes us feel safe. If I know that I have people who will protect me because we have the same values and the same beliefs and the same ideas and the same goals, then I'm going to be very reluctant to change any of those things. Right? Because if I do, I might get excluded by my safety net, right? So it's not so easy to just say, okay, well, I'm part of this other company now. We have to recognize that people feel that changing their allegiance in this way feels like a death to them, right? And so all those things need to be taken into account. So I think those are some of the three big things about the way that the mind works that leaders should be aware of.
Yeah, I remember in one interview with Daniel Kahneman, the great psychologist, he was asked, since you have written the main reference in the cognitive psychology or cognitive biases, so probably you don't fall for the mistakes of cognitive biases. And he said, no, actually, I'm a human and I fall for them. But because I keep on working on them, I fall less for them and the damage is less for that. So my question to you, I know that you have your own practices about cognitive biases. So tell me, if you want to simplify this to someone who would like to replicate what you do, how do you pay attention to your own cognitive biases when they are in act, and what do you do then to overcome the outcome, the negative outcomes of them?
I think the biggest thing that somebody can do in order to improve in this is to learn to see any change of mind, any change of attitude as a sign of maturation and growth rather than a sign of weakness or flip-flopping in some way, right? I always tell people when they change a belief based on evidence, they're demonstrating that they have learned, right? And every time that we reject changing based on evidence, we have demonstrated that we're not learning, okay? So changing our mind about something is the mark of a good thinker, okay? So I look for opportunities to change my mind about something, right? I look for opportunities to say, hey, you know, I used to be wrong. I used to think this, but now I think this, and I'm a better person for it. Okay. So there's a mindset piece of it here, right? That each time we change an attitude or a belief or a view on something, we've grown. Okay. Now, as far as how we implement that from day to day, okay, I think it's important to dedicate time consistently to learning about these things and to discuss them with somebody else who's interested in them, right? Because the more we talk about something, the more we have it, you know, in the front of our mind, the more likely we're going to see it, right? If we're talking about confirmation bias, we'll see examples of it everywhere. Because that's one of the beauties of confirmation bias is when you're looking for it, you'll see it, right? So, you know, when we train ourselves to talk about these things and have conversations with them about other people or with other people, we'll get more skillful at it. And then checking in with ourselves, you know, again, a daily or weekly report card that we do for ourselves on how we did for this is really skillful. But the most important thing is the attitude, right? The attitude of, hey, you know what? I believe something different now based on the evidence. And that's the sign of a true thinker.
Yeah. So our first season was about meaning of life. And actually here we're talking about purpose. How does these two pieces work together? Purpose and awareness, because I know that you use these terms in your model as well.
Yeah. So we can't really know what our purpose is if we don't have awareness, right? So, you know, one of my favorite concepts is the Greek concept of eudaimonia, right? Which is the idea of flourishing. Okay. So it's something that Aristotle talked about a lot. And it's this idea of being used for that which we are best suited, right? It's fulfilling our potential. So the eudaimonic life is to have this feeling of well-being that comes from flourishing. And flourishing comes from understanding what our strengths and capabilities are and what we enjoy doing. And we flourish when we're able to combine those two things, right? I enjoy this and I'm good at it, okay? That is the ideal in life, okay? There are people who want to do something they're good at, but they don't enjoy, and that never goes very well. And there are other people who want to do something they enjoy, but they're not very good at it, and so that doesn't work either. The way we flourish is by understanding the intersection of those two things, and then designing some path forward. Okay, because of this, I am therefore going to devote my time and energy to this. Okay, and that's what purpose is about. Okay, now we cannot understand either what brings us satisfaction or what we are truly skillful at or capable of without practicing awareness.
Interesting. Also, I'm always fascinated with something that you always promote, which is awareness is very important, but not enough on its own. It requires a kind of action. Can you just say more about that? Because I know that you have a different school than other schools that says it's all what you need is to be present. Once you're present, everything is okay. You'll go back to your essence and life would be great.
Yeah, so there are a number of schools, again, who take this approach, that just be present. And I've even met some Buddhist teachers that are friends of mine who say, well, when you just practice awareness, then your Buddha nature comes out and you'll know what to do. That strikes me as, frankly, dangerous, right? Because the reason that the Buddha taught mindfulness is so that people would be able to pay attention to what he was saying, right? And, again, if we stick with the idea of Buddhism, it's understanding, but then it's following the Eightfold Path, which are skillful practices, okay? Things that we need to be skillful at doing, which are learned skills, okay? They're not just things that we innately understand what to do. This belief that we will innately understand how to engage with the world, frankly, just seems kind of silly to anybody who's ever been a parent, right? I mean, I've got 4 boys and, they're great boys, but, they did not innately know how to interact with the world, right? They needed to be taught. They needed to be educated. They needed to learn skills. And we all need to do that. And you can't do those things if you don't have the capacity to pay attention to some extent. Okay, so the purpose of awareness is to enhance the capacity for building skillfulness, right? And I'll also say the skillfulness comes in 2 forms, right? One is learning good habits. Okay, with my sons, I ingrained into their brains at an early age to use good manners, right? To say please, to say thank you, to say hello to the neighbors when they see them on the street, to ask, how are you today, Mrs. Jones? That sort of thing. And you drill it into their brain so that it becomes a habit. They don't have to think about, should I say please or thank you here? They just do it, okay? And so we all want to develop virtuous habits that we don't have to think about. Okay, being kind to people automatically rather than saying, should I be kind to this person or not? Okay, as a good example of that, right? So we need to develop skillful habits that we don't need awareness for, right? I mean, I don't need to be practicing awareness if I am just automatically saying please and thank you to people. Okay, I can give my mind a rest. Okay, now the second element is intentionality. And intentionality is what we use in novel situations. Okay. Oh, this is different. I don't know this person. Should I talk to them or not? Right? If I stick with my kids as an example, I want them to habitually say please or thank you or hello or how are you today to people that they know. Okay. But I don't want them to be overly friendly to, strangers in a van, for example. Okay. This is where intentionality and skillfulness comes in. And so we have to have both of those capacities, right? We have to know, to get back to Kahneman, know when to use fast thinking and when to use slow thinking. Okay. So these are the capacities we want to build. And we have to recognize that slow thinking is a learned skill, right? It's a refined skill that takes time and effort and is not natural to us. So awareness is just the starting point. Awareness helps us train to have good virtuous habit in common situations, meaning things we encounter all the time, and it enables us to have skillfulness and intentionality in novel situations, things that are new or unusual to us.
Amazing. I mean, we can talk for hours on the topic of awareness.
Well, you know me, and I certainly can, Tamer. But this has been great.
I think it was a very good conversation. Some of these questions, I think the first time I discussed them with you, and some of them we discussed before, but it's like the next level of discussion. So I'm very happy the outcome so far. So I have two remaining questions.
Yeah.
First question would be, is there any question that you think I should have asked you and that served the purpose of this episode, but I didn't?
I think we got them all. I will just say that I'll recommend my book, How to Think Well and Why, and because in that book it explains my clear thinking model, which I think is useful for people to understand. Right, so it's a model of identifying 5 ways in which we become unaware. Right, we fall into deluded thinking. We've talked about the cognitive biases and the ways that the brain worked, which is sort of the first level of that. Second is around personality, and again, we've touched on that with the Enneagram, understanding our personality lens. I'm an 8, you're a 9. We see the world differently because of that. Culture is the third ring. Okay, and again, I'm from the US, you're from Egypt. We bring different cultural understandings to the world and our interactions with each other. The fourth ring or fourth area is ignorance, right? Things we simply do not know, and we don't know that we don't know, and so they shape our ability to see the world clearly. And then finally, misinformation, which I think is one of the biggest challenges we face today in a world where there's all this information out there and most of it is wrong, right? And I think as humans, we're really vulnerable. So understanding these 5 obstacles to clear thinking and the skills and tools for counteracting them, I think is really important. And I would encourage people to take a look at that book.
So actually related to that, if people would like to know more about you and your models, your books, your contents in general, where would they go to find that? Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff on social media. So I would encourage people to go to either mariosicora.com, my personal website, or our business website, awareness2action.com. There's lots of good resources on both of those websites. You can also follow me on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. And in the near future, I'm going to start posting on TikTok. So you can look for me there as well, at Mario Sikora.
You also have some podcasts. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's the Enneagram and a Movie podcast, which you were on with us for the first season. So you can find that in the enneagramandamovie.com, which is a nice way of learning about the Enneagram through the lens of movies.
Thank you so much, Mario. It was really a pleasure having this conversation with you. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope you did, and I hope our audience would enjoy it.
The pleasure was mine, Tamer. So thank you for having me. It's always good to see you and talk to you, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much.